So thank you all for sharing, for your feedback, whether it's through the podcast at the One Thing email, whether it's through social. We really take it to heart, and when you give us your perspectives and your feedbacks, we like to bring you the things that you asked for, and this was one of them. And this was really fun for Chris and I to get to create and do together, because we both have been following this journey using One Thing principles for such a long time, and then have been using it with through our coaching and through our corporate consulting, and we really come to understand what works, what doesn't, what some of our favorite principles are in use in our own lives, as well as that we've seen work well for the lives of others. So we're excited to get to share this with you. Today's going to be super interactive. This is designed for you to ask questions, for you to give feedback, for you to give your ahas as we go through it. If this is your first session with us, an aha is like a light bulb, like I learned this today, something I'm taking away from today. So please make this your day, and make sure that you're throwing in the chat if there's anything you want us to double click on or expand on. We're really excited to get to walk through these with you today.
Yeah, thanks, Nikki. And Paris had asked if we're recording this. We are. We're going to record it. We'll share it out after the fact. So thanks for asking.
And thanks for being a fan, Paris. We appreciate you.
Should we jump in?
Let's do
Lesson
it.
number one. Lesson number one is mine, and something that, if you know the One Thing, the core of this, the backbone of this is the 80-20 rule. And the way I've interpreted this is what I call the 20% approach. And I'll share a little bit of what I mean when I say the 20% approach. We're talking about, like I said, the core principle of this is the 80-20 rule. And how we apply this in our world, the 80-20 principle, is thinking about the minority of things that will deliver the majority of our results. So in other words, how can you look at your workflow, at your world, at the things that you're focused on relative to your goals, and separate out the things that matter most from the things that matter least? And to do this, you have to acknowledge first that everything doesn't matter equally. So if we can do that, if we can all agree that not all things matter equally, then we can start to apply this kind of filter to our world. And in doing that, it gives you an incredible amount of leverage, right? You can get a maximum return on investment for the things that you're doing. And kind of traditionally, the way we approach this is look at your goals, look at your to-do list, flip that to-do list into what we call a success list, figure out the 20% items that are on there. What are the things that if you focus on these 2 out of 10 are going to give you the greatest ROI for your time, for your week? And if you can do that, you're incredibly more leveraged. You can have a much higher impact on your week. And that is true. And I think you can expand this. And why I call this the 20% approach is you can almost overlay this philosophy to all parts of your life. And I think it's so much more powerful when you start to look at your world through the lens of this 20% approach. And I think there's just more to it. And if you think about communication, you think about the emails that you send, you think about the meetings that you go into, you think about how you just start to look at everything that you do from this angle of, what's the most important thing I need to accomplish here? Or like, what is the 20% of this conversation? And if you can start to do that, then it has this incredible impact on your overall productivity.
Well, I think what's so important about this, Chris, and what I've really learned in using this, and frankly, thank you to you who's taught me how to expand even further on this, is this idea that you said that you could sort of overlay this into anything. That it's not, a lot of people think when we talk about the One Thing, it's their first piece of feedback is like, well, I can't possibly just do one thing all day, right? And you're not. It's one thing at a time, and then you can use this to just get clarity on how you need to behave in that moment. If I ask myself when I walk into my home at the end of the day, I'm going to ask myself, hey, what's the one thing I can do such that by doing it lets my family know that I'm so happy to be here? What's the one thing I could do such that by doing it every day would improve my health incrementally? So this is just allows you to focus on what's going to be most impactful in whatever it is that you're trying to do. It just allows you to narrow what you need to do and start to drown out the noise of all the things that you feel like you should do.
Yeah, and something really fun and we're really lucky. We have some awesome people and organizations that we have the right to work with, or they work with us, and something will happen when we work with them. We teach them about the 80-20 rule, and without us even intending to insert this, they'll start to call things the 20%, right? We'll say, hey, what's our 20% here? What's the 20% there? And it's just a way of trying to orient everybody on, hey, what's the most important thing here? And I love that. And there's just one more thing I would add. If you start to apply this filter and you think about things in this way, keep in mind that the 20% is relative to you and what's in your head. And that's, each person may view the 20% a little bit differently. So keep in mind, to do this as a team, to do this as an organization, or within even just two people in a relationship, You have to create a common understanding of what that 20% is. And there's some really great ways to do that. You can work on a common business plan, just call out common goals. But even greater way to create leverage is to do this together, but know that you have to align on what those common goals are and what that 20% is.
And ultimately, I love this distinction between how you behave with this inside your own world and what it looks like when you start to bring it into a team, right? And what's so important about this, Chris, is to your point, there's so many people who will say, well, we disagree on what the 20% is. But remember that you're always looking at the 20% from your perspective. So if I go to an organization, I say, what's the one thing we could do such that by doing it would make everything else easier or unnecessary? Well, if your job is in HR, you're probably going to have one answer. And if the person that you're talking to's job is in finance, they're going to have a different answer. And if the other person that you're talking to in that conversation is in sales, they're going to have a different answer. So part of this allows you to get clarity. And then to Chris's point, together, you decide what's going to be the organizational one thing. And then each of you are going to have the one thing in your specific verticals.
All right. If you like this idea, right, the 20%, how you can apply this to other things, let's do something together. So what I want you to do, if you have a meeting, a really important meeting, a high impact meeting, or a really important conversation that you're going to have in the next week, put me in the chat. Put me in the chat if you've got an important meeting in the next week or a big conversation that you have on the horizon. All right. We've got a few. Awesome. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to just think for a moment about that conversation. Think about that meeting. And I want you to just imagine for a second, what is the 20%? Using this context, right? What is the 20% that you want to walk away from that meeting with, or perhaps that you want to kind of convey in that meeting or in that conversation? What's the 20%? And just try to think for a second and extract from that all the things you could say or all the things you may cover in that meeting. What's the 20%? See if you can capture that. And here's what we're going to do. Once you can establish that, go one step further and ask yourself, what's the one thing I want to take away from that conversation or I want to convey in that meeting? And then I want you to put it in the chat. What's the one thing you want that meeting to cover, walk away with, conversation, etc.? Put it in the chat for us. All right, Brandon said a complete draft of the workflow. Love it. Clarity on timeline, task execution. So formal. Anybody else have something they want to share? Here we go. These are good. Love it. Love it. These are perfect. So this perfect example of how you can expand this 20% approach. Typically, we think about it in relation specifically to our goals, and that is true. But also we can think about it on how we maximize the meetings, the conversations, the communication that we have. So thanks for sharing. Nikki, I'll pass it over to you and we can look at lesson number 2.
Y'all ready for lesson number 2? So this is my personal favorite inside. I would offer probably all of the one thing, because I bet that there are a lot of people who are on this Zoom who are achievers. If you're someone who really prides yourself on being an achiever, just put a me or an I in the chat. You're someone who you feel like one of your special skills is that you will just outwork anyone. I always used to sort of wear it as a badge of honor that I would just die on the treadmill. Like that was part of my identity. And then I realized that often when we're achievers, when we put the badge of honor on ourselves, that we're the hardest worker in the room, that we can sometimes get lost in this trap of time spent versus time spent well. So my lesson number 2 is that time spent is not the same as time spent well. And I'll tell you very candidly, you can take it off, Chris. I'll tell you very candidly where this came from was an aha moment that I had in a conversation with Jay many years ago, far long before I was a part of the One Thing officially, and he asked me an easy question of how are things going, and I didn't give the well, like, oh, they're good, how are you type of answer. Instead, I said, well, I'm working really hard and I feel like I'm spinning my wheels a little bit. How many of you have ever felt like that? You're working harder than you've ever worked, but you're not making any progress. Like I'm spinning and I'm not going anywhere. But at the end of the day, I'm exhausted and I feel like I've given it my all and yet I'm not making any progress. And so he said, he said to me in that moment something that forever changed my trajectory and also made this one of my favorite principles, perhaps my favorite principle. He said, Nikki, when you're working hard on things that don't matter, does it matter that you're working at all? He said, when you're working hard on things that don't matter, does it matter that you're working at all? And what he was saying to me is that you're working really hard, but have you taken a minute to step back and ask yourself, are the things that I'm working really hard on, do they actually matter? Are they actually moving the needle forward? And if I did an inventory of my day, the hard thing that I came to realize was, no, there wasn't a whole lot that I was working hard on. I was priding myself on doing the most, not doing the most important. Yeah, you guys are thrown in the chat. I love that. Busy versus productive, right? And ultimately, so many people get stuck in this trap that they believe that activity is productivity, and it's not, right? That's the busyness trap. Activity is not the same as productivity. And yes, you're right. This totally ties to the 20% rule. It's that so many of us who are achievers pride ourselves on the length of time we'll work. We pride ourselves on how hard we'll work in anything. We will outwork everyone. And yet, do we need to? The question is, do we need to? Or could we use that same work ethic and drive at the right things in shorter periods of time with perhaps less length, but more stamina and more energy, and actually create greater results? Because it's not about how many hours we put in, it's what we put into the hours. And so at the end of the day, we have to ask ourselves exactly what Nate just put into the chat, which is, am I being productive or am I just being busy? Am I the hardest worker who's just spinning my wheels? Or am I actually moving these things forward? And so I would ask all of you, just do an inventory, maybe of your day. For those of you that are a little further in your day, if you're not on West Coast like me, we're still at the relative beginning, right? Or look at your day yesterday and just ask yourself, was I busy or was I productive? Could I actually say that I moved these things forward or this thing forward? And drop it in the chat. If you move these things forward, say yes. And if you were just busy versus productive, say busy. I'd love to get an inventory of where everybody is at. And this is so important to use some of the tools. Yeah, some of you were saying busy. And ultimately, when we don't use the tools that we walk you through so often inside the one thing, that we end up being really busy, but not being productive and not moving these initiatives forward. And then we'll get to the end of the year or the end of the quarter or the end of the month or the end of the day, and we'll say, why aren't we hitting these goals? And it's because we're working our tail off, but we're not working our tail off on the things that matter most. And so this one is absolutely, to me, the most impactful in my own life. Time spent, not the same as time spent well.
Yeah, if you guys have been around with us for a long time, or if not, Jeff Woods, he used to say this all the time, and it always stuck with me. But you got to view your time as an investment, and you are looking for a return on that investment. And if you can think about investing your time versus spending your time, as silly as that little change of words may seem, it's words matter. And if you can flip that in your mind to think about, like, hey, when am I looking at this block of time as an investment, and how do I get the most return for that time? I think that's a really healthy perspective there. And I'll also add, Nikki, that I think we're really good sometimes at finding ways to be busy in the attempt at dodging subconsciously the most important things we want to do for whatever reason, either, like I said, subconsciously or consciously. So if you're the type of person, I bet everybody on this call could fill 80 hours a week if they wanted to. Right? That's not a question. The volume of work is there if you want it. The question is whether or not you're going to work on the most important things. And so it's easy to be busy. The gift is to figure out what the most important things are and invest your time wisely.
Well, I think the challenge too, Chris, is that when we're achievers, we often get stuck in this trap that if I just take on more, that I'll be even more successful. But more often than not, as our to-do list expands, our productivity actually retracts. Right? As your to-do list expands, your productivity actually retracts. So we want to grow by taking on more, not realizing that actually inhibits our growth.
So true.
Shall we move to number 3?
Let's do it. So number 3 is mine, and I'll share with you guys. One moment. that, here we go. Clarity is a journey, not a destination. And when I say this, what I mean by clarity is understanding what you want and perhaps the path that you intend to take to get it. And the process of figuring out the things that matter to you, figuring out what you want to accomplish, or perhaps who you need to grow into to earn the right to achieve your goals, and really your purpose and your priorities are vivid, and you're clear on the things that you want to go after. This is what I mean by clarity. And when we say it's a journey, it's not a destination. It's not something that you just arrive to once. You do some clarity work, you have the ahas, and then you're set for life, right? And if you have that, then good for you, then you're an anomaly. But if you're like most people, then you have these kind of small wins over time. And if you can view clarity like the pursuit of clarity like a muscle that you need to build, you can get better over time at figuring those things out, or figuring them out faster, or recognizing that some kind of obstacles in your way and how you need to adjust your plan or adjust what your goals are based on what you've learned about yourself or learned about the path. This is like the revisit, the cycle, the circle of gaining clarity, taking action, gaining clarity, taking action. And it truly is a journey. And in the One Thing book, well, Gary and Jay call out the path of mastery. And I think this is a piece of that, right? And learning to master this process of clarity is truly a journey, and it's something that you're not going to just arrive to. And the real skill is how you create short intervals of time between the pursuit of clarity, and that you get there much faster. And you're not looking for these big spans of time where the distance between where you are today and where you want to get to ultimately just grows bigger and bigger, and it becomes hard to see the path. So I think the important takeaway for me here is knowing that you don't have to have it all figured out, that you can figure things out over time. And it's best just to do this more often, and you get better at it.
Chris, I think this is such an important topic, because we see so many people delay their future, their goals, their big dreams by waiting for them to have clarity on the perfect plan. They want to know exactly what's going to happen, exactly how to build it all out. They want to write the perfect 35-page business plan, to which we will often tell them it would be impossible. You've never been there before, and it would be impossible for you to write the perfect plan. What we want you to do is write incremental plans forward, but you identify the right path forward by implementing the imperfect plan. You cannot hope to know what you should be doing when you're 10 stages from now, when you've just never been there before. So the goal is for you to build the best plan that you can with the knowledge that you have, and then take action where your clarity becomes even more clear, right? Where you get even more clarity on how you should move forward when you know more.
Yeah, and what a great time it is right now. It's the end of March, almost the beginning of April, and a great opportunity to get clarity on what success looks like next month. And it's one of those weeks where if you wait until next week to start doing your April planning, you've already got a couple days into the month. And so I want to encourage you guys to recognize that clarity is something that you can create in a process over time. And the best way to gain clarity, in my opinion, is doing active reflection and thinking about, hey, where did I win in March? What does success look like in April? So here's what I'd like you guys to do. If you have a time block that you're going to already in place, that you're going to reflect on and build your April goals, put me in the chat. If you already have an existing time block where you're going to build your April goals, put me in the chat. Todd's got his April. Sean, love it. Just completed my 4-on-1 yesterday.
Love
with the
that.
team. You guys are awesome. Okay, so if you don't, here's what I want you to do. If you do, awesome. I would encourage you to do it this week before you hit next week, and you're already a couple days into the month. So make sure it's this week. But if you don't have that and you guys are listening, I highly encourage you, go find some time right now on your calendar between now and the end of the week where you can find just 30 minutes to an hour, and you can reflect on March, build your goals for April.
Shall we jump into 4?
Let's do it.
Number 4, y'all have heard us talk about it. You've read it in the book, and it's one that I can tell you personally, I resisted for a really long time. Wore this one like my other badge of honor. I'm a great multitasker, and at the end of the day, multitasking is quite simply a lie. We've got a lot of fun exercises, so if you ever come to a session with us in person and we say, who's great at multitasking? It's a total trap. We get you to raise your hand, and then we have you play a really fun fun game with us where we totally disprove that anybody can be really successful at multitasking in a fun way and with lots of love. But ultimately, we know it's a lie. And no one can actually be good at multitasking where it matters, by the way. Because I'm going to tell you that where it doesn't matter, then it's fine to multitask. I'll give the example that I always give of often I answer my emails while watching The Office in the background. It's like my background music at this point. So I like to listen to it or watch it while I'm answering emails to give me something to laugh at while I'm working through something that I frankly don't love doing. And if you're scrolling social media while you're waiting in line, you're multitasking, that's fine. We're talking about not multitasking when it matters most, not multitasking when you should be focused on your most important thing. Because if doing the most important thing is the most important thing, we always ask, why would you try to be doing anything else? If doing the most important thing is the most important thing, why would you be doing anything else? And in today's world, we are constantly berated for our attention. You can go ahead and take this off, Chris, but I want you all to think that the number one job, the number one goal of the people who built this thing that we always have with us is to take your attention away from whatever you're doing and put your attention onto that. It is so easy today in this world to get distracted. So easy. So you have to build, we call it building a bunker. You have to build a bunker around yourself in order to ensure that you don't. Personally, the way that I do it is I turn all notifications off on my phone during the day. Rest assured that if you send me a cat video, I will stop doing whatever I'm doing and I will watch it. It's funny, I'm sure of it. And yet I have to make sure that that doesn't distract me from the most important thing. So personally, the way I do it, I just turn off all my notifications. You quite literally can't get a hold of me during the day unless I want to find you, unless it's part of my priority, right? So ultimately, you have to figure out ways to be able to do this, because we often think that we're not multitasking, but we actually are. And the example that I always give here is long ago, I had a coach who really like forced this into my line of sight. Another reason coaching is so important is because I resisted this principle for a long time. And they gave me a little clicker. And whenever I switched tasks or started multitasking, I just had to click the clicker. That's all I had to do. So if I was in the middle of something important and I looked at my phone because a notification came through, or I stopped at the coffee circle in the office to talk to somebody or whatever it was, I just clicked the clicker. And at the end of the week, I had to turn in that clicker to my coach. And I was pretty embarrassed, frankly, to find that I was in triple digits the number of times I had clicked the clicker. The number of times I had gotten distracted from the most important thing in a 1 week span was triple digits on that clicker. I'm not going to tell you the exact number because I'm still embarrassed about it to this day. And yet it was my first indication that when we think we're not multitasking, we actually are. Every time our attention gets taken away from what matters most, we're trying to multitask. And ultimately, we always think that we can get right back into it, but we can't. The example I always give is if y'all were writing a really important email and somebody came into your office and said, I really need to talk to you about this thing, Chris, like this is super important. And of course you're nice. So you're going to be like, yeah, I can talk to you about that. Do you go right back to wherever you left off in that email? Answer's definitely not. You got to read it from the beginning. You got to get right back on track. And ultimately it's going to distract you from what matters most. So certainly one of my hardest lessons to digest and something I continuously struggle with is that multitasking is quite simply a lie. Even if you think you're good at it, you're probably taken away from what matters most.
Yeah, my experience is very similar in and around this. And what I've had to, I guess, come to terms with in this lesson is that it's an impossible standard to do this perfectly, to never multitask. I mean, maybe there's a few of you out there that are just really, really good. You're better than me. What I have to do is just try to be better and try to find at least, if I can identify the most important work I have to do in a day. Like if you're following our process and you're saying, hey, what's my one thing for today? The one thing that's going to get me the greatest return on investment for my time towards my goals during that time block, good luck getting a hold of me. I'm going to shut things down. And that for me is how I win, because you're fighting a very strong current trying to not multitask all day long, but we can be better. And I think that's something that's really helped me.
And I love what Gary says about this, which he reminds me of often, which he always says that multitasking is really just the opportunity to scrub more than one thing at a time. Multitasking is just the opportunity to screw up more than one thing at a time, because ultimately it's impossible to do two things well at once. So if it matters to you, it's one thing at a time.
Awesome. All right, let's jump into lesson number 5. Accountability is your ally. Big, scary accountability. If we can shift our perspective about accountability, it can become a piece of leverage for you. Accountability can become a tool that you can use to put these things in place that will keep you on track to be successful. And there are different forms of accountability, and you have the foundational kind of fundamental self-driven accountability, and that's important. We need to be accountable, we need to hold ourselves accountable, but I think it's really healthy to recognize that that's limited and you can only do so much. Everybody's going to have varying levels of self-driven accountability, but we have to get to that next level, look outside ourselves. And I think it's really important to consider what those different forms are, but it starts with kind of flipping the switch and saying, okay, if I want to achieve extraordinary things in my life, I need to strategically place accountability in places that are going to get me there, and know yourself and know the things and what your tendencies are and how you can use accountability as an ally, as an asset, and kind of shift away from maybe shying away from the big scary perception of this word, and make it more about how can you put it to work for you. And some different things to think about. You have people, the people around you, like how can you leverage the people around you in your sphere to help keep you accountable in a positive way? That can be a spouse or partner. Those have their own limitations too, but still a resource for you nonetheless. Partners, coworkers, groups are a really important consideration. What kind of groups can you get in with like-minded people and others that can help keep you accountable? We do things like the 66-day challenge for that reason, so that there's a group of people working together to stay accountable towards their challenge. I think the highest form of accountability personally is a coach. And if you've ever had a coach, what you're basically saying is you're hiring someone whose job is to keep you accountable, assuming you've chosen a coach that offers that specifically or calls that out. Most should. But that's something that you can put in place to keep you accountable, and you can fire them if they don't do a good job. You can set expectations about what accountability looks like for you, and they can help you see your blind spots. There's also things like tools. We use a 411. You guys, if you know our world, we talk about this all the time. That is a tool to help you stay accountable and call out the things that you say you're going to do. And also there's technology, right? There's lots of stuff out there now, depending on how tech savvy you are or want to be, AI, all kinds of stuff. So look at all of these things as different tools to help stand up accountability for you, so that you can use that to help propel you forward towards your goals.
Chris, I love your perspective on this, and I can tell y'all that I struggle with accountability, because like a lot of you, from an achiever's mindset, I'm like, I'm really accountable. I'm super driven. I'm really clear on what I want to achieve. There's no way that having a coach is going to move me forward. Like nobody needs to hold me accountable. I'm just fine. We hear that all the time. And as business started to get harder for me, the universal message that I needed a coach continued to come up in my life, but it felt like a really big investment. A good coach is an investment. And I remember the best thing that my coach, my first coach, asked me when I said, wow, this is just super expensive. I don't know if I want to make this investment. Like, I'm super accountable on my own. I don't even think I need you. They said, well, what is it that you're trying to achieve? And I told them, and they said, well, why haven't you achieved it by yourself? And I kind of circled around like the same objections we all give: it's hard, time, blah, blah, blah. And they said, well, what would you get if you achieved that? And I would have made like an additional $150,000 that year, which was substantially less, of course, than I would have spent on that coaching relationship. And so once I understood that, once someone said, well, would you invest this to make this? I was like, well, yeah, every day of the week. That's what a coach does for you. That's what a coach helps you to stay accountable to. Because even if you're an achiever, even if you're a driver, you're never going to be as accountable to yourself as you would be to someone who's checking in on your progress. And frankly, to this day, I've got a coach, and every year I spend more for a coach than I did the year prior. And it's because I simply need someone to look for the blind spots that I'm not going to see by myself. It's so important. All right, should we jump into 6, Chris? I don't think that we have a slide for it, so I'm just going to jump into it. And this is the lie of a balanced life. This, I think, is one of the most important principles that we call out, and it's through part of the lies in the one thing. And I don't know about y'all, but I've had, how many of you are like me and you've had somebody tell you, to give me a me in the chat, somebody tell you some version of like, you need more balance in your life. You need to be more balanced. Yeah, probably a lot of you. I'm seeing the me's come through. Yeah, you need more balance in your life. And here's the challenge. The challenge is that balance is a lie, and the idea of it, trying to achieve it, is going to absolutely captivate you with insanity. Because at the end of the day, trying to be perfectly balanced implies that everything matters equally. And the fact of the matter is it just doesn't. Balance implies that everything matters equally. And the fact of the matter is it doesn't. I'm not trying to give equal time to everything in my life, right? Balance implies that if I give equal time to everything, that I should give the same amount of time to my work, that I should to my family, that I should to myself, that I should to walking my dog, that I should to my health goals. It would just be impossible to achieve true balance across the board. What we challenge in the one thing is that you should not ask yourself whether or not to go in or out of balance. The question is, do you go short or do you go long? And in our world, what we mean by that is that when you go short, this is the areas of our life that we don't want to be out of balance for too long. And the example that I always give here is background noise coming from us, Chris?
I got it.
Okay, cool. So I thought I was going crazy for a second. So where we go short is in things like our personal life, right? So we don't want to go too long or too far out of balance in our personal life. And the example I always give here is my family is extremely supportive of what I do. I've got a husband, a daughter, a big squishy bulldog, if you follow me on Instagram, and I love them and very much enjoy spending my time with them. But I also love my work. And my work sometimes requires that I go out of town. And so when I go out of town, I'm out of balance. I'm quite simply not home. So I'm not with them. So whether it's for a couple days or sometimes the maximum of about a week, I'm out of balance during that time. So I'm not seeing my family at all. But when I get back, so long as I get back into balance, that I get back to spending my regular time with them, or perhaps maybe a little more when I return, I'm just going to stay in balance. But if I left for 6 months and didn't come back, do you think that my relationships might look different when I get back? Answer is yes, right? And ultimately, it's the opposite of that in our work, where we have to make peace with the fact that extraordinary results typically require for us to go out of balance for long periods of time. In other words, you have to do your one thing for long enough in order for it to make manifest results. You can't do your one thing for 3 days and say, where's all my success? It's going to require that you do it for an extended period of time. So the question isn't, do we go in or out of balance? The question is, we are going to go in and out of balance, and do we and how do we do it purposefully, and do we go short or do we go long?
Yeah, the beyond what you shared there, for me in this lesson, it's being intentional about where you can go out of balance, and where you need to perhaps not drop something. And I talk about this a lot, but there's the kind of glass balls analogy and the rubber balls, and you're juggling all these different balls of your life, and it's really helpful to know which ones are glass and rubber. In other words, which one, if you drop it, will bounce and you can pick it up later, or if you drop it, it'll scuff or break forever. And there are certain things that, if you talked about going long or short, if you're going to go out of balance, just do it intentionally and know how long and what things you can drop for a while that are okay to put down and pick up later.
I think you always also just have to make peace with the fact that when you live a big life, there's almost always something that's going to be underserved at any given time, right? So there's almost always going to be something that's underserved, and there's almost always going to be some chaos around you when you live a big life. And this is where clarity on what matters most gets more and more and more important.
So true. I'm going to jump us into the next lesson, Nikki, which is, you guys are ready? It's intended to be and should be simple. Now, who is guilty on this call of making things more complicated than it needs to be? That's me. I'm raising my hand if you can't see. There is a natural tendency with all of this to make it more complicated than it needs to be. And it's such a good reminder, just keep it simple. Like the power is in the simplicity. It's supposed to be one thing. As hard as you want to fight it, it's one thing more than anything else that's going to get you what you need. And every alarm bell in your body's probably telling you that more than one thing matters equally, but it doesn't. And also the system itself, right? It's the surprisingly simple truth behind extraordinary results. It is surprisingly simple. It doesn't always mean that it's easy, but if you use a 411, I guarantee you at some point you've turned it into a glorified to-do list, or you've tried to make it a project management tool, or you try to complicate this process and tie everything together. But the beauty is in the simplicity, and from that simplicity comes clarity. And it's just such a healthy reminder to just take some of the noise out, and you got to just go for simple. And I think that's, for me, one of the most important pieces of this process, is because I naturally, knowing myself, I want to add complexity and make a lot of bells and whistles and the connectivity and make it do a lot of things, add tech. And sometimes that's not in service of what you're trying to accomplish. It's actually just making things more difficult. And so it's like cleaning out your closet or cleaning out your garage. I mean, things just kind of pile in there over time, and you just got to hit pause and say, okay, how do I just go back and simplify this as much as possible? Because through that simplicity will come clarity from which you can draw action and you can make progress.
I think one of my favorite questions that I ask my team often is, what action are we avoiding by making this more complicated than it actually is? Overcomplication is often an excuse not to take action on something, because most things are pretty simple, but they look a whole lot like work, right? And so in order to avoid that, we'll overcomplicate it, right? We'll spend time making it much more complex than it actually is. So next time you're avoiding the work because you're making it overcomplicated, or next time you're totally in your head, I would just ask yourself, what action am I avoiding by making this more complicated than it actually is?
All right, Nikki, over to you.
So this really applies to how we started all of this, which is the 20%, but I'm going to go back to how we identify the 20%, which is the focusing question. What is the one thing I could do such that by doing it, everything else will be easier or unnecessary? And I'll go back to the example I gave earlier, which is a lot of people get stuck in this because they're like, oh my gosh, I can't possibly pick one thing. But remember, it's one thing at a time, and it's getting clarity on what my one thing is in this moment. Right? I could ask, what's the one thing in my health? Or what's the one thing in my finances? What's the one thing in my business? What's the one thing today that I could do such that by doing it would make everything else easier and necessary? And by the way, I want you to asterisk, this is easier or unnecessary. In other words, I'm not saying that all these other things don't matter. I'm just saying that they don't matter at the expense of what matters most. This is the ability to quiet all of the noise, all the things pulling our, we should do this or should do that, and focus in on what actually matters most.
Yeah, and the focusing question is so powerful. There's different pieces of that, and to break it down just briefly, what's the one thing you can do, right? Not that you feel like you should do, or that's this huge, big, violent swing in your current behavior set. Like, what's just one thing that you can do that is achievable for you, because it's about consistency over intensity. And I think that's just an important thing to separate out. It's that word "can" is so important.
All right, Chris, in the interest of time, you want to move to the next one?
I'm already there. Okay, you know the answer. Lesson number 9. And what I mean by this, and what's really been powerful for me and teaching so many people in and around the one thing, and so much I've learned from them, of myself in that process, is that more often than not, almost exclusively, the answer that you're looking for is in you. You know the answer. It's just whether or not you can flush it out. You can pull the walls down. You can get past your own maybe limiting perception or beliefs and to see what's there. But so much of what we do is just asking the right questions to help people identify what they already know. They just have to discover it. And so this lesson for me is powerful because you have what you're looking for inside of you. You just have to do the work to get it out. And I think we need to take some time to recognize that yes, there are things that we can do for inspiration. There's stuff we're going to have to do to figure out the how we go do what we figured out we want to do. Of course, if you're setting big enough goals, it means you're going to have to learn new things, acquire new resources. All of that is true. But what you want to achieve, it's there. You just have to do the work to unpack it.
Well, I think this is so important, Chris, because I always sort of laugh when as a coach, you often get credit for what already lives inside someone. Because what a coach really does, like a good coach, doesn't really tell you anything. There's not a whole lot of advice that's involved. I think a lot of people get that relationship wrong, right? They think it's somebody who's telling you what to do every day. And that's not what a great coach does. What a great coach does is ask you the right questions to reveal what's inside of you already. And so I think this is so true that we all really know what we should be doing. And we know the answer. Sometimes we just need someone to help us to ask the right questions so that we can get what we know out, right? Sometimes our noise is a little bit too loud. So I have to admit to everybody, I kind of cheated on the last principle here. I wrapped 4 in 1. So I cheated our 10 and kind of gave you, what would that be, 13? So I cheated a little bit, but this is really about having awareness around the 4 thieves of productivity. And ultimately, this is about knowing the things that can take you off track. Because I think when you can keep them in front, when you can keep them forward facing and you know the things that are going to take you off track, it helps you to recognize them, right? So this is the 4 thieves of productivity, if you've read the book or haven't read the book, excuse me, are the inability to say no, fear of chaos, poor health habits, and your environment doesn't support your goals. All 4 of those are more often than not, if we're coaching someone, the things that take you off track. It's one of those 4. And I'll asterisk the 2 that I think for me have shown up the most, which is 1, the inability to say no. So I'm looking at you, all my people pleasers. You want to help everybody, you want to do everything, and as a result of doing it, you actually achieve nothing, or you achieve everybody else's goals, but not yours. And in the book, you'll read that Gary and Jay say that 1 yes has to be defended by 1,000 no's. In other words, whenever you say yes to something, you are automatically saying no to many other things, because you only have so much time and you only have so much energy, right? So you have to defend your yeses with 1,000 no's and ensure that you're saying no so that you can make your yeses count. And the other one I'll asterisk is poor health habits. This is often something that people don't pay attention to when they're really driving toward a goal, whether it's business or productivity or income or whatever it might be. And interestingly enough, Chris and I have the privilege of being on the podcast and getting to interview dozens, hundreds of really successful people. And I would offer that there's a group of maybe 5 or so things that they have in common. And the top one that we often see is every single one of them has absolute clarity on their health habits, because they understand that in order to perform at the highest level, they have to have their health in order. That is their vehicle in order to perform. And that's one that we see people get off track with very often.
Yeah. And the one that stands out for me and I find myself gravitating towards is environment. And I just want to offer this. When you think about environment, so many people will naturally just start to imagine a physical environment. And that is true. Like, are you working in an environment that's conducive for the type of work that you're doing? That's important. I would offer that you should also consider the non-physical, like your environment, as in the people you surround yourself by and the things that you're doing to rub shoulders with the kind of people that you want to grow into and the advice that you're getting and things like this. So just consider your environment more than the physical. And if you want to become a different person, or if you want to grow into a place where you can earn the right to achieve extraordinary goals, then you're going to have to change your environment most likely. And so be intentional about what that is.
And ultimately, all of these together, I think what's so important about all these 10 that we walked you through today is that you're going to recognize yourself in some of them, maybe all of them, or a few of them. We all have different behavioral patterns. And part of the importance of having accountability around these things is that we all tend to show up differently. Like there's probably 1 or 2 of these that you were like, yep, that's the one for me. That's the one that's a challenge, or that's the one that's helped me the most, or whatever that looks like. And there's probably a few of you who recognized yourself maybe in just one of them. You're like, hey, all these other things I've kind of gotten a wrap on, but this one thing I still have a challenge with. And that's the importance of making peace with the fact that you are continuously on this journey. What you're hearing Chris and I say is that, hey, we haven't mastered this yet. I'll let you know when I do, but I don't think it's in my near future. We have certainly not mastered this yet. And so you shouldn't give yourself an expectation to either. This is really about making peace with the fact that you need to continuously be on the journey of practicing these principles. And ultimately, it's about you coming back to how to stay focused on what matters to you.
Yeah, we got a little bit of a late start, so hopefully you guys are okay to stick with us for a sec here. And I just want to ask the group if you could share, like, what's a lesson or a takeaway you have from what we shared? Like, what's one thing that you walk away with today that you feel like you can apply that relates to you, and put that in the chat for us. What's one thing or one lesson or one piece of one of these lessons that really impacted you?
And while y'all are doing that, if it would be helpful, we have a link. A lot of you ask us about learning more about coaching and learning more about what it would look like for you to have someone who's consistently on your team in order to help move you towards some of these big goals. And if that's something you have curiosity around, if you just want to talk to one of our coaches, if you want to learn what this would look like for you, go ahead and we'll put the link in the chat as well. But go ahead and scan this QR code to schedule a discovery call. This is your opportunity to just get to learn more, your opportunity to just learn what this might look like for you. Go ahead and scan it and just have that opportunity to have a conversation. Even if you're like, this feels crazy, I've never done this before, feels totally outside of what I want to do, just scan it and have the conversation. So even if it's not right for you right now, you can learn what it would look like for you in the future, and learn what it might feel like for you to have somebody who's rooting for your achievement as equally as much as you are.
Awesome. I'll leave this up for you guys. If you want us to be a part of your world and help you hit your goals, then like Nikki said, schedule a call. We'll talk about it. No obligation to sign up. We'd love to tell you about what we do and how our program could support you. And Nikki, should we take some questions while everybody's hanging out?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, if you guys want any more information or want us to expand on anything, or you have a question about coaching or anything in general, put it in the chat or feel free to come off mute. We'll hang for a few minutes and answer y'all's questions. Paris.
Those are quick ahas. I'm reading through them.
Paris raised her hand, and Luana, yes, we're going to send the video out to the email that you registered for this webinar.
Paris, you might need to vocalize your question. I think I saw it in the chat and maybe we're not answering it.
Let me know.
I'm letting you know. I need you to vocalize your question because I don't understand it.
Okay, I didn't know when I would start. This is a little bit challenging. You mentioned your great example on how the coach asked you about the $150,000, and I'm paraphrasing, on your own, good luck, do your best trying to achieve that, or you can do it with a coach. You're more likely, and your answer was, I would do that every day of the week. And so I thought to myself, how can I look at my situation where I don't need a coach or someone to ask me, hey, do you need to be coached? Where I can look at my situation and say something that Nikki would say if she was left with that information or that question, and the answer was all day long, every day of the week. How can I dialogue it? I'm not trying to make things complicated, but I really want to be able to ingest a question that allows me to say, you know what? I'm raising my hand. I want to get a coach because I know it's going to help me make 20 grand. So how do I dialogue or formulate a strong rationale that says, wow, this coach, I'm losing out on the opportunity cost of not having one. That's number one. And number two, this coach can actually, if not help me achieve 20 grand, it could get me so close, I could just about walk myself the rest of the way.
Yeah, I got you. So let's go back to Chris's investment example, right? So when we look at our time as an investment, then accordingly, we can also look at our money as an investment. So a coaching investment is both time and money. I'm spending time with this person and I'm obviously got to pay them, right? And so what I'm looking at in my own world is that what first and foremost, you have to know what you're trying to achieve. To answer this question, you need to know what you're trying to do, right? And then beyond that, once you know that, I'm going to ask myself, okay, if I haven't achieved it yet, it means that I'm not going to do it by myself, most likely, right? Or I could get there faster if I had someone holding me accountable. And so then I'm just going to ask myself, is this investment, whatever that cost is, worth this return? So let me give you an example. If let's say a coach cost me, I don't know, I'm just throwing out numbers, $12,000 a year. And I could see that my return on that $12,000 was your example, $20,000. Would I invest 12,000 to make 20,000 in a year? Answer that question for yourselves. My answer is yes. If someone said, give me 12,000 and at the end of the year, I'll give you 20, I would be like, yep, all day I will do that, right? I'm not going to make that money in the market. So ultimately, my answer is yes. So you have to first know what you want to achieve, and then you have to break it down to what is the financial outcome of what I'm going to achieve, and is coaching worth that? That's how I would think about it.
That's great. What's the financial outcome of what I'm going to achieve? If it's, you know, if it gets you excited, if it gets me excited, then yeah, I can dial the numbers and reach out.
There you
Okay,
go.
thank you.
All right. Yeah, Nikki, if you have to jump, I can hang. And for anybody else who's still on the call, I see 130 odd participants still here. I'm here to hang for a minute. If you guys have some more questions, myself and the team, we'd love to answer them for you. Put them in the chat. And otherwise, feel free to jump off mute, and I'll hang and see what you guys got. How does one determine what the one thing is? Polito, that is a big old question you dropped in there. How do you determine what the one thing is? Well, I think you have to recognize first, like, what we mean by the one thing. What we're saying is, like, it's relative to when you're asking the question. So if you're trying to figure out, hey, like, what is my vision of where I want to be someday in the future? My big one thing, like, what is this I want to achieve 10 years? That's the big question to answer. And you got to do some deep work to figure that out. But once you have clarity on what that bigger vision is, you can use that to do what we call goal setting to the now, and work your way backwards from this picture of whatever that goal is someday in the future to today, and connect your today to your tomorrows, hitting these kind of milestones like dominoes the whole way. And so you can answer the question by going backwards. You could say, well, what's the single most important thing, my one thing I need to accomplish today, that connects to my goal for the week, that connects to my goal for the month and the year, and so on. And so that is the best brief answer I can give you, I think, right now, on how to identify what your one thing is. It really is relative, but think big, go small. Big vision of the future, go small, and ask the question, what's the most important thing I need to do today? I hope that helps. Alex, you got your hand raised. What's going on? If you want to come off mute, fire away.
Yeah. Thank you. Got it.
You're welcome.
So going to my, and thank you for this. It's very helpful. So my question is, I'm very hesitant towards coaching, probably because I'm just biased, and it has no proof that I'm right, and that's why I'm open to coaching. But my main concerns are, like, for instance, my position is, I'm father, I have 3 kids, I like to be with my family. So I sometimes wondering if so I have too many thoughts in my mind, and hopefully it comes out and makes sense. But my thing is, I don't want to have someone tell me, well, just try to keep working or focus on this, because you guys were talking about balance, and yes, it's not about 30% here, 40% there, and it's more like the one thing with my family is to be present, and the one thing with my job is to be more efficient. And you guys talked about productivity versus being busy, which I love. So could you share what you guys do? Like, let's say we're in this call where you, with the QR that you said we could have a specific call, but how would it look like? Like, what would a coach do to make it worth it? You know, because I already know that I probably would imagine most of us know that we need to push a little bit more here and screw more a little bit there, and just tighten the other screws there. And so could you help me understand a little bit more on the coaching side? I don't know if hopefully it made sense, and the feelings that I have, because they're more like feelings than facts.
Sure. No, that's great. Thank you for asking the question. And I would say at the highest level, what coaching does is help you get clear on whatever it is that you want to accomplish in your life, and help you stay accountable to the plan that you co-author together with your coach to get there. And there's a lot that goes into that. In our coaching system, we follow a general framework that we call the 3 Ps, and that stands for purpose, priority, and productivity. And they build on each other like an iceberg. And what you see above the waterline is productivity, but to be really productive, you have to go below the waterline. And that means you have to have clear priorities. You have to know what to prioritize in order to be productive. And to know what to prioritize, you have to have a strong sense of purpose. So what we do is help you identify, what is that bigger purpose? What are your big someday goals? What are your core values? What are the things that matter most to you? How do you live in alignment with those values so that over time you're prioritizing the right things so you can be productive to the goals that you set? So what a coach does and what we try to do in our program is help you figure that out. And we talked about this earlier, but you have the answers. Think about this. There's two ends of the spectrum in our world. You have coaching on one end and consulting on the other. Coaching is asking very powerful questions so that you can self-discover the things that are within you. And what we're doing is using our system and our training, our things to help you identify that. The other side of the spectrum is consulting, where we're teaching you things, right? We're teaching you the system of the one thing. And so it's this kind of harmony of coaching out the answers that you have for what you want and how you're going to get there, and consulting in a model and a system that we teach in and around the one thing. I hope that answers your question, but we could dig into that for hours. And the best thing to do if you're genuinely curious beyond that is schedule that discovery call, and we can find time for you and I to talk for an hour and go through it.
It did help. It did help. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Mark, I was honoring the lesson of not multitasking, and I wasn't reading the chat while I was trying to answer the question there. Did I miss anything?
I think most of the questions in the chat I was able to get answered. If there's one that we didn't get, no, I think we got them all answered. So. Still
got 90 people hanging out. Hopefully you guys aren't multitasking and you're genuinely curious about what we're talking about here. Is there anything else that that I didn't answer for you and that we can while Mark and I are here? Our time is yours right now, so please let us know. Okay.
Lucha in the chat said you have to blocked in your calendar all those important things in your life: family time, daily activities, etc., and make a productivity plan. Cold calling, leads, lead generation, viewings, times, and respect that schedule. That's absolutely right. Yep. We talk about this. It's called time blocking, and we make appointments for our most important activities. We make sure that we actually have time on the calendar to go do those things. Great call out.
Yeah. Yeah, if you think about your time blocks or the space that you're committing to yourself where you're going to do your most important work, it's where this is going to happen. And not all times matter equally. And you should look at, when you're time blocking, where you're most likely to be successful with the work you're going to do. And you think most people have their highest horsepower in the morning, and it just kind of fades until lunch. You get a boost and then it fades again through the rest of the day. Not everybody's like that, but there's exceptions, but most people. So just sharing, if you're saying, hey, here's the most important thing I need to accomplish this week, probably wouldn't want to put that at 6 p.m. on a Friday. That's I mean, unless you like happy hours and time blocks, it's probably not going to be great for you. So I'm joking, but think about that seriously. Put your time blocks where you're most likely to be successful.
Yeah.
So Abel send some questions somewhere. Helen, are you so you're asking if you've got time to think over what we shared today and you want to ask questions in the future where you could send those?
Yeah, it looks like it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And Helen, you can send those to my email, which is mark@theonething.com, and I'll be happy to continue that conversation. Or Helen, what may be more beneficial is that QR code that we use to schedule that free coaching call. Get a list of questions together, and we can discuss that there. Lynn asked, why is time blocking so difficult? Lynn, it's a muscle that we have to build, right? It takes, just like any other muscle in our body, it takes some effort to build. And we have found that there's 4 kind of main reasons why, or at least I've started to discover 4 main reasons why people miss time blocks. That's usually the hard part, is sticking to them. That's one of the things we discuss in coaching. So happy to share that with you again on a free coaching call. We're just going to run out of time today, I think. So
yeah, I'll offer something else about time blocking. Maybe for you, just ask the question, okay, looking back on, let's say you're looking back on the last week and you're reflecting, what was the one greatest disruptor to your time blocks? What was the one thing more than anything else that kind of threw you off? and then narrow that focus. And then you can say, okay, well, I just had this one distraction. I just wouldn't put my phone down, whatever that might be. And there's a million things it could be for you, but isolate what that is, and then ask the question, okay, well, what's one thing I can do to be better? And then hold yourself accountable to that over the next week, and then get to the end of the week and reflect on it again, and just kind of continuously refine. It can be a great way to just narrow your focus down to the most important thing to work on.
Yep, exactly. All right, Chris. Well,
Okay.
let's wrap it there. And friends, thanks so much for being here. Remember, if we're going to send this recording out as soon as we can and get back over to you guys. So great job,
Thank
Chris.
you so much. Yeah, it was great seeing everybody. Thanks for being here.
All right, friends. Talk soon.
Bye, everybody.